Okay, 3, 2, 1, live. How you doing, friends? Ernie here, and this is the 0 Days to Expiration podcast. It is Monday, another start of another great 0 DTE week. Today we had a trade on earlier. It didn't pan out. However, we did something that was kind of a Hail Mary pass, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, it probably, for most people that employed it, allowed them to recoup all the risk that they had taken in the trade. The Hail Mary, now let me just explain. The Hail Mary is well, everyone knows what a Hail Mary pass is in football. It's the one where you just fling it up there and then hope someone catches it. Ours is kind of like that. We put on butterflies way out of the money, and so they have asymmetric characteristics to them. Very, very little risk. However, if price goes against us, so at first, price looked like it was going right towards the butterfly. Then all of a sudden the market reverses. Price goes way away from the butterfly. The short strikes, where we derive most of the profit from these strategies, starts decaying until it's worth practically nothing. If we didn't have the long strikes, that would be profitable. That's actual profit, that we can take those two short strikes off, buy them back for just pennies. In this case, 5 or 10 cents, when they may have been worth $1, $2, or who knows how much they were worth at the time. And so that's profit. Now that gets offset by the two long strikes. However, the Hail Mary is if price decides to reverse. That's from the Department of Redundancy Department. It reverses and goes back, and then the closest long strike starts gaining in value rather rapidly. It's no longer being hedged by the short strikes. So as price moves up, and if it moves up quickly, in some cases, you can actually make more than what the original strategy had offered you. In this particular case, at least in my case, what it did was it removed all the loss from the small risk that we had, plus it covered maybe a few dollars and commissions. So overall, it was a no event day. But that is really one of the benefits, I think, of having an asymmetric strategy, and in particular something like the butterfly. I mean, it's not something that happens all the time. But even if I had lost the asymmetric or the very small risk, it would have been no big deal. That particular risk was, or that strategy, when I put it on, had about a 1 to 8 risk to reward ratio. So had we moved towards the profit, there was a good chance that we could have made 100, 200, 300%. In this particular case, I think I maybe made, I don't know, less than 0.5%. So, but it's better than not making anything at all. We still may have a trade at the end of the day in our last hour of the day trade. So we're going to take a look at that. Now, this is episode number 87. And what I wanted to talk about was asymmetric distributions. Or let's back up and say what I really wanted to talk about is the difference between asymmetric distributions and the things that we need to be cognizant of, and normal distributions. Now, one of the problems with trading is that everyone bases their models on a normal distribution model, which means that there is an equal number of wins and losses about the mean, and they make their predictions based on that kind of distribution of prices or events or things that might happen. Now, if you do that, and if in fact the market does provide a normal distribution of events, you'd never win anything, because you would have an equal number of wins and losses and sizes of wins and losses about the mean. So it makes no sense. And that's in fact what our trading platforms are showing us too, and most of the calculations are based on a normal distribution. And this makes no sense because the market is anything but normal. It is asymmetric. Now, what is an asymmetric distribution? An asymmetric distribution is one where you have something called fat tails. You'll have another thing called skew and kurtosis. Now, these are really weird names. Skewness, kurtosis, and fat tails. So what that means is that describes the shape of the distribution. Now, normally it looks like a bell, a little bell, right? Like a big bell and flared out rim of the bell. And the very middle of that graph, right at the peakiest point of the bell, is what we would call the mean or the average price. And typically the average price has most of the population of results are either to the left or to the right of that mean. In an asymmetric distribution, they are either more to the left or more to the right. Now, if we took to the right as meaning positive, in other words, those were all the winners, and to the left meaning negative, then what we would want is we would want a large number of small losses. So we would want a little bit of the height or the kurtosis. I'll explain that in a little bit on the left side, and then a long tail, what's called a fat tail, and if possible, make it nice and fat, not too thin, but nice and fat and long, so that we have a lot of big winners. So that would be a positive asymmetry. Now, the amount of lean that it has from one side to the other, or the amount of tail on one side and lack of tail on the other, is the skewness. And so something that has a long tail on the positive side is considered a positive skew, and something that has a long tail and less or a lot of small wins on, that would be a negative skew. That would mean that you have a lot of small wins, but you have a lot of huge losses. So that very accurately describes the difference between the different types of 0 DTE strategies. Now, the strategy that most people are using with 0 DTE, where they're taking high probability spreads or high probability iron condors, has a negative skew. And that means that their wins are always capped. They might get a lot of wins, but they're small, and there's a large volume of them. But then there's these big, huge losses. And that negative skew doesn't work out in terms of a positive outcome. What we do is completely the opposite, because we're not looking to make a lot of high probability trades. We're looking at medium to low probability trades that also have many, many more winners on their side, because we're skewed to the right now with long fat tails on the other side. The other strategy has no fat tail on the winning side. They're always capped at small wins, very small wins. So their skew is really tight right up against that median on the right side, but very long on the negative side. Ours is the other way around. It's very, very tight on the loss side, or it's very high and tight on the loss side, but very long on the win side. So that is really the difference between other 0 DTE strategies and the 0 DTE way. Now, what I've been describing is the skewness, how far or how asymmetric that distribution is about the mean. And, I was going to draw some charts for the benefit of the people on YouTube, but then that doesn't translate well over to the podcast. But what I'll do is I'll do a separate video that describes this. Now, this other term, kurtosis, that talks about the relative size of the peak of the distribution, or the size or the height of the bell. And so you could have a positive kurtosis, which would mean that the height is very high. So you would want a height very high if you had a positive skew, so that you have a lot of these wins, or a lot of the you would have a lot of small losses. I guess, man, I think I have to draw it. But anyways, the kurtosis is the height of the bell, or its peakedness, or its flatness. So you can have different shapes. So they're skewed and peaky or flatty. So that's what you have. Skewness gives you either a positive asymmetry or a negative asymmetry, and kurtosis will provide you with the magnitude of whatever is the predominant distribution. So in our case, we would want in our case, we have a severely skewed to the positive side, where we have a lot of medium and small wins and some very large wins, and very, very few small losses, or as few as possible, where it's almost the mirror of all the other 0 DTE strategies. Hope that makes sense. And it's, maybe what I'll do for this podcast is I'll put a link and then provide some, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a link in the podcast and provide a PDF that shows the difference between the two. And then it will be clear as day. So anyways, there you go. There's asymmetric distributions. I hope that was informative to you. You liked what I had to say. And, well, we have to get on to our last hour trade because it looks like the market is going nuts. We had a huge reversal, 2 huge reversals today. And we have to get to it. So we'll see you on the next 0 DTE, or 0 Days to Expiration podcast. Peace to you all. Take care.